Welcome to my channel. Today we have an art journal tutorial that has multiple techniques. We're going to do daffodils in two ways, with a stencil and with a napkin. I'll link the napkin and the stencil in the description box below. So I'm going to start this page with this classic daffodil napkin from NinnysNapkins.com. There's a coupon code in the description box, so check it out if you're looking for napkins, stencils, or other art journaling supplies. So I'm removing 2 plies of excess papers. You can save these. They're great for adding texture and using in other ways in your art journaling. And check out some of my other videos to see how I use them. So what I want to do is harvest some of the elements of this napkin, and I'm using the water cutting technique, or what I call water cutting technique, which is basically a liner brush and water dipped in water, and then I run it along where I want to cut, and I eliminate a lot of the excess white of the napkin. This gives me a deckled edge, which I prefer to a cut edge, as it shows up less when you put it on your art journal page. So I'm just deciding what parts of the napkin I want and what parts I don't want. This is my time to establish and figure out my composition. So at this time I like that one in the corner, and then I think, oh, I'm going to cut out these daffodils and put them on the other side. So at this time I had no thoughts of using that stencil, but when I put those daffodils over there, I remembered this daffodil stencil from the Crafter's Workshop. It's one of their rustic sign stencils that I have yet to use. So I'm looking at it and I decide I want to use the ones that are on the right hand side. So I'm just masking off the parts that I don't want. And underneath I have where that napkin's going, because I'm okay if it overlaps a little bit, but I don't want it to overlap too much. So now I'm just positioning this on my 9x12 mixed media page, testing out the napkin placement. And then I'm going to tape down my stencil. And the reason I'm taping it down is because I'm going to use modeling paste. And even if I was just stenciling with paint, that just helps secure it in place. So I'm going to use TCW modeling paste, which I love. And that's available at Ninny's Napkins as well as TCW Shopify store. Both are in the description box. But this thickness, if you struggle with modeling paste seeping under the stencil, you may want to try this one out. I put it on my glass mat and I'm applying it with my key card. My favorite way to put modeling paste on. I just have so much success with that technique. So when you put modeling paste on a stencil, you need to stop the creative process here and wash it off, which is what I do. But I absolutely love how this works. So you need to make sure you dry the modeling paste. You can use a heat tool. If you put it too close, it'll bubble, which can be a look you're looking for, but I don't want to. Now I'm gessoing over top of the modeling paste here and the whole page, and for 2 reasons. One, the background technique that I want to do requires it to be gessoed. I'm going to get a better effect. And 2, I'm going to be painting over the modeling paste daffodils, and that's just going to take the paint better. Before I glue down the daffodils, I want to add some script to the background. This is the Is Stencil from the Crafter's Workshop, but I've flipped it over and I'm doing the reverse side, so it just looks like scribbles, fake script. I don't want the words that go with that. And I'm using my archival ink and a blending brush, which works perfectly fine. You don't need to spend or buy the expensive ones. So now that I have what I want in the background, I am going to glue down my napkin. I'm using fluid matte medium, and I'm putting it under the napkin and then on top. The napkin goes translucent and you can see some of that script coming through, and that's okay. I want it peeking through, and I am going to be colorizing the daffodils later. So if there's some script where I don't want it, it's not a problem. So I'm ready to do the background, and I'm using my Inktense blocks. This is like watercolor, but it's ink and it's permanent when it's dry. So I'm using 3 shades of blue, and then I'm wetting it and activating it. I'm trying hard not to get it too blended because I like the variation in tone. And I will be painting the blue down below in the leaves of the daffodils, but that's coming up. Now, to do this saran wrap technique, which is going to add texture and pattern to my background very easily, you need it to be a little bit wet. Now, this technique will work with watercolor. It will also work with acrylic paints with slight variations. But you want it wet. So once it's done, I'm grabbing a piece of saran wrap and then placing it on, making crinkles. This is catching the paint, and it's going to dry with that pattern and texture. So while that's sitting there drying, I'm going to take a couple different sizes of brushes, rub with water on the Inktense blocks, the same ones that I used at the top, and paint in between on the white spaces of the napkin and in between the modeling paste daffodils, the leaves as well. I'm not worried about if I get some color on the modeling paste, because I know I can gesso that out when I start over painting it. And I'm not being very precise. I'm getting a very loose, painterly watercolor effect. And that's very, very forgiving. So don't let that scare you. So now that that's all done, and no, I didn't make you watch all of it, I'm liking where it's at. I'm not worried about any place where it got. I'm going to remove the saran wrap and just grab the heat tool and dry any wet parts. But look at that wonderful texture that you get using the saran wrap technique. Now I'm ready to colorize my daffodils, and I'm using cadmium yellow and white gesso. I did have a lighter yellow, but the gesso lightened it enough and I was getting the tone that I wanted. So now I'm just painting the entire daffodil over top of the modeling paste and in between the modeling paste with this combination of yellow. Again, I am not being careful. If there's some blue that got on there when I was painting in the background, I just put some gesso and then let that dry, which is why I'm holding the heat tool here. Later I can come in with my liner brush like I'm showing you here and touch up if I need to add any of that blue. So I'm just pretty much globbing on. Here I'm adding gesso over top of this blue. In a minute you're going to see that, because I realize that that's part of the daffodil. It shouldn't be blue, so I put gesso and then I dry it and continue on. There's not much definition that's showing. Later on when I do more, I'm going to show a way of bringing out that texture paste and the details of the daffodil. And this technique of overpainting the modeling paste will work for any focal image stenciling with modeling paste. Here I'm adding yellow oxide. It's a darker yellow, and I'm brushing it on, rubbing it on, and it's really bringing out the texture from the modeling paste. Now my goal here is to make the daffodils that are modeling paste daffodils look like the ones that are napkins. So I'm taking some of that yellow oxide and some of those same colors and doing more of a wash on the napkin ones, although I do add a little bit of gesso here and there as well. When you first look at this, I want it to look like it's all the same bunch of daffodils. Although we know there's so many different variations, they could very easily have different variations growing there that would look different. Some of the napkin, the petals of the daffodil got ripped off. I just painted it in. Here I'm just adding that yellow oxide. And it really, while this is sped up, I really am not being precise. This is so incredibly forgiving. So now I'm taking burnt sienna, which is that orange color that you see in the napkin daffodil, and I'm going to put it on parts of the texture paste. That's where I want to highlight this color. I put it on, and then you see me rubbing it with my fingers, adding a little bit more. There is no right or wrong, just have fun with it, enjoy it. And then I'm adding some of that yellow oxide or burnt sienna on the napkin, tweaking it up, adding a little bit more. Trying to make my daffodils all match. Now I'm taking some of that burnt sienna and shading around the daffodil petals. This is just adding definition to it, makes them stand out, adds a little bit of color. And what I'm doing to the napkin daffodils, I'm also doing to my texture paste daffodils. There are close-ups at the end of the texture paste daffodils and the napkin daffodils, so I hope you watch right to the end. I think they just look spectacular. I was so impressed with how they turned out. Now I'm painting the stems and leaves of the texture paste or modeling paste daffodils, and I'm using Hooker's green, and then I mix in some of the yellow oxide and the cadmium yellow. I will also be painting with the same paint the stems of the napkin daffodils. Remember, I want this to look like it's the same bunch of daffodils. So here I'm painting the stems. There's not much foliage on this side. Just using the Inktense blocks, I had some white spots and I just wanted to paint them in with the blue. So that's what you see me doing here. Just adding water on the brush and rubbing it against the Inktense block. Now I'm turned to the sentiment pack, and I'm using sentiment from my Through the Garden Gate. I love this one. As the sun colors flowers, so does art color life. But I thought it was a little too long and would get lost on the page, so I kept searching, Live Life in Full Bloom, and then I end up choosing the one, Let Joy Burst Forth Like Flowers in Spring. And the daffodils definitely herald spring here on Vancouver Island. So I'm cutting off some of the excess white and debating whether I want to keep it as this full rectangle. But I decide I want to get rid of more of the white. I want to see the words, my background, and my focal image, not so much white. But you can tweak your sentiment however you want. You can change the size using your printer settings. My digital sentiment packs are all available at NinnysNapkins.com. So I decide I'm just going to keep cutting off that white, which I guess is the way I roll. And then I'm playing with the placement of the sentiment. Now's your time to audition it. Try different ways. If you always go one way, try something else. Take a picture of it to decide if you like it or not. I decide maybe what would it look like if I had it go kind of dancing across the page. But I decide maybe not. Hands up if you spend a lot of time playing with your sentiment or where you're putting it. Sometimes I think maybe a little too much. But every little bit adds. Then I decide maybe I could put them all together without that excess white. So to add a little bit of the yellow and the burnt sienna to the background, I'm just going to take those colors, add water to them to thin them down, use my fan brush and splatter. This is just giving that little bit of color to the sky. It makes you think that there's just a field of daffodils out there. You'll see the inclusion of this little step in the close-ups at the end of the video. Thank you if you are a subscriber. If you're not, please hit the subscribe button, click the bell, and check to be notified of upcoming videos. That way you won't miss any. You'll get a thumbnail, you can see if it interests you, and then you can watch it. And there you can see just very subtle addition to the background. So once that's dry, I am going to edge my page using my angle brush and black acrylic paint. This black, the addition of this black frames the page, but it also will read well with the black lettering of the sentiment that I'm adding. I was going to do a card using another piece of this same napkin, but since I decided to do more techniques with the modeling paste daffodils, that will have to be in an upcoming video. Maybe I'll do a video where I do multiple mixed media cards, where you can use your art journaling techniques and mixed media techniques to create usable art that everyone loves getting. So I'm adding some shading around the daffodils, just a little bit. But I'm going to sketch around the napkin daffodils with this General's charcoal pencil. This is the medium one. And because it's texturized, the napkin, it's not completely smooth, you get a very rough, sketchy line, which I love and suits this so much. I'm holding the pencil loosely. I'm not trying to be precise. I'm not exactly outlining it. Then I decide I'm going to try this on the modeling paste. And OMG, I love the effect. I'm going to zoom in here and you'll be able to see it. And you'll be able to see it in the close-ups at the end. But I'm just running it over and it's just giving me these beautiful sketchy lines that are just adding so much to my finished picture. Now here I've grabbed my angle brush, and I apologize that it's out of frame, but I'm adding some highlights with white gesso and my angle brush. I add that to the texture paste daffodils as well as the napkin daffodils. And you'll see that in the close-ups. A few more sketchy lines. And I'm ready to put on the sentiment. And I glued that down with my fluid matte medium. And I'm making sure that it is completely dry, and I'm pulling off the tape that I put on so I get a straight edge. Now I'm grabbing the General's charcoal. This time it's the soft one, and I'm just adding a little bit more shading, edging around the page. And I'm bringing this up so it's really dark at the bottom, and you'll notice that I made it darker blue at the behind the daffodils, and it gets lighter as it goes up. Here I'm just putting it on and smudging it, and then I do the same thing to outline my sentiment. And I just do top and bottom. I don't do the side. Gives a slightly different look. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you give one of the techniques at least a try. Here are the close-ups. Until next time, go get creative.